Hi, welcome back to another episode of the Happier Life Project, the podcast where we explore the many paths to better mental health and well-being. I'm your host, Gabby Sanderson, and today we are stepping into a topic that might be new to some of you, cyclical living, and discovering how aligning with natural rhythms such as the menstrual cycle and the changing seasons can profoundly impact our mental health. Now, full disclosure, this wasn't an area that I knew much about, but I found it absolutely fascinating. And for our male listeners, I don't want to discourage you from tuning in, but I will give you a heads up. We do dive deep into a woman's cycle. However, I've been very mindful to make sure I ask our guest about how this can apply to everybody. And we don't just talk about the menstrual cycle, we talk about all different types of cycles. So there's definitely something for you here too. So, who's joining us today? We're thrilled to welcome Lou Perham, a cyclical living mentor, educator, and speaker. Lou empowers women to embrace their cycles, prioritize rest, and find balance by syncing with life's natural rhythms. Whether it's the menstrual cycle, lunar phases, or seasonal shifts, Lou uses this framework to guide individuals towards holistic well-being. Lou supports women to live, work, and thrive in sync with their cyclical nature, and she empowers her clients to unlock and evolve through the cyclical way of life. As you're about to discover, cyclical living can be a profound way to reconnect with ourselves and improve our mental health. Lou has a very powerful personal story and a wealth of knowledge to share. So, ready to find a healthier, happier you? Let's get started. Welcome to the Happier Life Project podcast. Cyclical living mentor, educator, speaker, and mum, Lou Perham.
Thank you so much for having me, Gabby.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. Today, we're going to be learning about syncing with natural rhythms, such as the menstrual cycle and seasonal changes, and how that can significantly influence our well-being, and specifically because we're obviously a mental health app through the lens of mental health. So you say you connect people to their cyclical nature so they can live balanced, authentic, and fulfilled lives. So I think we have to start right at the beginning with this, Lou, because for me, I'm a complete novice, and maybe some people will also be learning about this for the first time today too. And maybe some people already are interested and, work with this stuff. But I think let's kick off. What the heck is cyclical living?
Great question. So I think what we can do is we can notice that there are cycles all around us. And often in our sort of current systems, which are fairly linear, we miss the nuance of the fact that we are constantly changing. We go from A to B. It's the shortest distance, therefore we think it's the most efficient. But actually a cycle shows us that we have ebbs and flows. So if you think about a wave coming into shore, it comes up and then it dips back, but it has to go back for the new wave to come back in again. And so we see this around us all the time, growth within an oak tree. Every year our nature grows around us, but it has to die back in winter to be able to nourish itself, restore, and then it's ready to bud and bloom again in spring and summer. And then it sheds its leaves again and it goes again. So we can see these natural cycles around us all the time. Our breath is another example of a cycle that we have. We inhale, our physicality changes, the exchange of gases that are going on inside us switch. And then as we exhale, something else happens. We let go, we surrender, we deepen. And it is a beautiful thing to start looking through the world, kind of take off the linear lens and you put on the cyclical one and you start seeing them everywhere.
Can you give me some examples of this, the cyclical lens? I assume body clock, the circadian rhythm is one.
Circadian rhythm is one.
You mentioned breath.
Yeah. So
what else?
Breathing, absolutely. Obviously, the 4 seasons of the year, if you live in a part of the world where you have the four seasons.
Mhm.
We also obviously have the menstrual cycle, which is a biggie for those who bleed and women. And we have the tide, I mentioned that. The moon cycle is a big one that I know quite a few people will be aware of. There just are cycles everywhere. And then there are cycles within cycles, but I don't want to go there yet because I don't want to confuse people.
Okay, great. I want to go into your story and how you've ended up being a mentor and so passionate about this. And
Yeah.
what I've read of your backstory, it was at 25, you got some, very shocking news, I'd imagine. And I'm just going to let you say it in your own words and we'll go from there.
Thanks, Gabby. Yeah. So at 25, I was really suffering with my periods. I'd been on the pill through my teenage years because I had really bad acne. And so to manage my skin, they'd put me on different contraceptive pills. I came off that in my early 20s, just intuitively thinking to myself, well, if I want to have a baby one day, I probably don't want to put synthetic hormones in my body. I don't know why. I had no real education around it, but I just had this instinct that it wasn't right for me.
Yeah.
And at 25, I was really suffering with period pain. And again, the doctors were saying, like, go on the pill. And so then I went through this process of being tested, and they came back and said that I had polycystic ovarian syndrome. And that it would be really unlikely that I'd be able to have a baby. And I've wanted children since I was like a child myself. And so that was so devastating and had a huge impact on my mental health, actually. Like, constantly worrying about the pain, constantly worrying about my appearance because I couldn't lose weight. I had dark hair growing in places that as a 25-year-old girl, you probably don't want to have dark hair growing on chin and chest and nipples and things like that. And it was just really jarring to know and very lonely to know how to deal with some of that stuff because it's all very shameful. It's like, the weight, the tire around your lower abdomen. And no matter how much I was working out, I couldn't lose weight. And it really impacted my self-esteem and my confidence and how resilient I was. And so I kind of went on a bit of a journey and I worked with a nutritionist and then I found my yoga practice. And that for me really changed everything. And through my yoga teacher, I met his wife and she had done Red School's training. And I sat with her for a half-day workshop. And it was like somebody had given me the language to explain what was going on inside me that I instinctively knew, but I had no words for.
Yeah.
And I was 32 years old when I learned that. So then within 6 months, I was way more mentally stable than I've ever been, so strong. 12 months, I was pain-free. And in 18 months, I was pregnant. So it was really, really phenomenal for me to start going and looking at this work. And then it's just deepened and deepened over my 30s.
And so the Red School, which you referenced, that's where you started to learn about cyclical living.
Yeah, so they're an educational organization that they have a menstruality leadership program. And I studied with them for the best part of a year. And it's really about self-leadership. And I think when we start paying attention to ourselves, because when we start tracking our menstrual cycle or any cycle, what we're doing is we are tracking how we are on that day. So it's a presencing tool. So a bit like mindfulness or meditation or breath work, it brings you into the present moment, which means your mind can't wander off and do other things and tell you a story because you're just checking in. And the way that I do it is really simply, I check in with four things. I check in with my body, so my physical, my intellectual, so my mind, my emotions, my energy, and my spiritual self. And so the analogy that I use is pies. Pies, pies.
Okay.
I just check in with those four things every day. And I'm just like, right, how am I? And then over time, once you've tracked for probably the minimum, I would say is 3 months. If you've got a regular cycle of around a 28, 29-day cycle, but do 3 cycles worth of tracking.
Okay.
And then you can start looking at your patterns. then you start noticing these patterns and you're like, oh, my days, I didn't know that every day 11 I had a wobble. Or one of my clients messaged me one day and she was like, I can't reverse park my car on day 24 of my cycle. And it was like this shocking information that she'd like found out about herself. And so it's a tool for us to be able to explore how we are over a period of time, which we might miss otherwise, and you can do that with your menstrual cycle, but you could also do that with your year, right? So if you don't have a menstrual cycle, you could look at, oh, okay, actually this time last year, I really felt like this. Or a lot of people feel a lot of grief at the end of summer, for instance, going into autumn. It can be a tricky transition for people where they're like, oh, the summer heights and the warm days and everything else, that's all ending. And I can feel quite sad and low. But actually, if you know that about yourself, you can start preparing, I guess, for that time. Maybe you book a holiday. Maybe you have something to look forward to. Maybe you really turn up the volume on your discipline around your well-being practices at that time. Maybe you do book a spa day or something nice to do or whatever it is that's for you. But even just bringing that awareness in of being like, oh, this isn't me. This is a cycle that's happening and I'm responding to it is so relieving. Because we get caught up in thinking that I am the thing. And actually, it's not us. It's this cycle that's happening in us or around us that's having an influence on us. And how we adapt and flex to it is in our control. And that for me, when I realized that, I was like, oh, I don't have to be a prisoner of this experience. I can start be feeling empowered by this cyclical experience that my cycle is having.
So we're not talking about breaking the cycle. We're talking about embracing it and working with it.
100%. Yes.
So then just going back to your story, the excruciating pain you were in.
Yeah.
Physically, I'm talking about, and then the mental toll as well of you always wanted kids and being told it was unlikely you were going to conceive. How did tracking your cycles have such a profound effect on your physical and mental health?
Yeah.
So, like, what did you do? Like, what did you notice and what could you adjust to be pain-free?
Yeah. So it's so interesting, isn't it? Because you kind of say that and you're like, oh, that doesn't make sense. But then you start doing it and you're like, you notice the difference. So the first thing is through tracking your cycle, you're paying attention to what's going on for you. Through then knowing what's going on for you that day, you can adapt. So if I'm feeling particularly stressed, or if I'm noticing that I am needing something, I can then respond to that. So your menstrual cycle is a stress sensitive system. So if we are stressed, if we are feeling pressure, if we are creating stories in our head, if we have a really critical inner voice, all of those things will be having an impact on our internal world. And if we're ignoring our internal world, then we don't realize it. So what my menstrual cycle tracking did was brought my awareness back inside to my internal world so I could see what I was doing to myself. And then through managing that and being like, well, that's not true, or that's not right, or, oh, I need this at this time, or I need to ring a friend and have a chat, or I need to go for a walk, or I need to go for a swim or jump in some cold water right now, and adapt my what I call rest practices as opposed to self-care. I really tapped into increasing and focusing on what is it that I need in this moment. And that might be breath work, that might be a hug, that might be a massage, that might be like whatever my, I guess, medicine to that situation was. I was able to respond because I had brought my awareness to what was happening inside me. And then that slowly over time then made this huge shift and change. And I think this is the beautiful thing that I have to say out loud. It's mystical. It doesn't necessarily make sense. This isn't necessarily, there is some science behind this. Obviously, we know about the hormones and the fluctuations.
Yeah.
But some of this is actually just about like reducing your stress down and seeing the impact of actually when you prioritize yourself, what the domino effect almost of that is. Because for me, what I realized really strongly was pain and my mental disruptions were my body's way of communicating with me to try and get my attention to say, hey, something's up. Life isn't going the way that feels good. And I see this when I give massages. Often people come on and they're like, oh, I didn't know that part of my body was hurting, because they've disassociated and they've numbed out from that part of their body. It's the same with our emotions on our insides.
Yeah.
So through paying attention, and I know like it sounds really simple, but actually often the best practices are, I found, and it's regular and it's consistent and it's simple and it's achievable. And then you can change things.
I mean, it's making all the sense, to the point I'm thinking as I'm listening to you speak, why do we not know this stuff? Do you know what I mean? Because you said it's a bit mystical. I mean, I definitely lean towards the spiritual, mystical side, not so much for this podcast, but me as a person. And for me, I don't think it actually sounds that mystical, because I've spoken to enough podcast guests now over the last 3 years to know enough, and our listeners too, that the mind and body are not separate. They are one. And there's been a lot of research to prove that. So it makes all the sense if, like, you're tracking your cycles and well, this time of the month, it's not necessarily to do with your menstrual, but this time of the month, maybe I don't sleep very well. So therefore, maybe I shouldn't load a load of meetings and extra work and overtime into that particular week, because I'm already going to be more stressed than usual because I don't sleep very well. And then I'm just putting on more stress, and then my body's going to react, and that might manifest as physical pain. So it makes all the sense to me, Lou. So thank you for sharing that. So we've talked a lot about the menstrual cycle through the cyclical lens. Can we talk about seasons? Because this would apply to both our male and female listeners. The seasonal cycles and mental health, like, how does that work? I mean, we know about SAD, but
seasonal affective disorder,
but I think that's about as far as it goes. And I imagine you can take us deeper.
Yeah, so it's really interesting, isn't it? Cycles are a universal truth. So there is a pattern that happens where we go from, why don't we use the solstices just as a point, because people tend to know we have that shortest day, longest night, winter solstice point. That's the depths of winter, right? And then what we're doing from there is that the light is returning, the energy is rising, the days are getting longer, the nights are getting shorter, and we ebb and flow between these two poles, and we come up, and then we have summer solstice, longest day, shortest night. And the seasons fit in around these 2 points, right? So if you imagine summer solstice is obviously in the middle of the summer season, winter solstice is in the middle of the winter season, but we have these two halfway points in between, which are our equinoxes, which is our spring equinox and our autumn equinox. And that is where we're at this sort of balanced point, as it were. And we are moving from one pole to another. That's what we do as we move through the seasons. So people might just naturally have like, oh, I love autumn, or oh, I really love winter, or yes, summer's my favorite season. So I think it's always really interesting to ask yourself, like, what are your favorite seasons? And why are they your favorite seasons? And then on the flip side, also ask, like, which season do I find challenging, and what do I find challenging about it? So for me, I know that a lot of people find January really hard. It's like we've been in the dark of the depths of winter, and actually this is a little bit what I was talking about. We have seasons within seasons. So we have the beginning of a new season. So it might feel really lovely to put on our cozy jumpers, for instance, and get our big woolly hats out. And, Christmas is always really fun. And, just nestling down in front of a Gavin and Stacey special or something on, around Christmas is feels really nourishing and cozy and restful. And we want to go into hibernation. But come January, it's sort of this point where you're like, actually, I feel like I want to,
a bit hollow,
this feels hard now, right?
Hollow. I don't want to cut you off, but I'm just thinking about how the fact that for people that do celebrate Christmas, it's about indulging, isn't it? Enjoying your favorite foods and drink and whatever. And then, like you said, the sort of nourishing aspect of like getting cozy and like giving yourself permission to maybe celebrate more and also enjoy things like Gavin and Stacey Christmas special. But then in January, it's all stripped away so abruptly, isn't it? It's like soon as you've got that kind of limbo between Christmas and New Year, and then New Year hits. And I just think it all gets like really from this build up of Christmas that now it starts in flipping September and October. It's like suddenly it's gone.
Well, and oddly, Christmas is like the oddest time to have that kind of a celebration in the year. If you think about it from a seasonal perspective, we want to be, in winter, what are the animals and what's nature doing? It's still, it's resting, it's quiet, it's solo, it's going down deeper. So although say like a tree might look dead from the outside, right? We know that actually what's happening is its roots are going deeper. It's sucking up the nutrients from the earth. It will come to a point of stillness and then it will regenerate and it will restore itself from the inside out. So actually what we can do from a priority perspective is look at winter through the lens of, if we want to approach this from a cyclical perspective, is like, what do I need to do that's almost my quiet internal work during this time to restore myself, to have enough energy to be able to do the rest of the year? Because actually winter is where we rest. Winter is where we restore. Winter is where we maybe dream and have ideas, but we don't take action. So then when we come across and we go, so Imbolc is around the 1st of Feb. Imbolc is like the next step in. So you go from winter solstice. So we're talking about this halfway point between winter solstice and spring equinox. We have this halfway point that's called Imbolc, and it's almost like the first stirrings of spring. So you might start seeing the crocuses come up. You might see the little baby daffodils coming up. You're reminded that life is stirring underneath the earth. And I think how we can deal with that in ourselves is, it's like, okay, what is it that I want to do this year? That is such a good time to make, like for me, New Year's resolutions don't make any sense at New Year's. Okay. That's when I want to make my New Year's resolutions, or like my intentions for the year is around the 1st of Feb. Because actually, if I've rested well enough, I'll have had space for new ideas to come in. And then I could be like, oh, actually, I'd really like to go on this holiday, or I want to really connect with these people, or I want this for my work, or like, this is the project, like I want to decorate the house this way this year or something. Like those are the ideas that I have when I think about my life from a seasonal perspective. And at that time, then we move through spring, and that really is about initiation. So if we think about what the buds on the trees, the sprouts are coming through, it really is that new beginnings, and being able to kind of protect that a little bit, but also maybe get your ducks in a row, do some planning, maybe start doing some research, like all of that kind of energy is there. But you'll probably feel more like socializing again. You've probably got like, you're not feeling like you did in January anymore, right? Like there's like excitement again, and you want to be with people, and the weather's changing. And I don't know, for me, spring's my favorite time. It's my favorite time in my menstrual cycle, and it's my favorite time of year. So it's like anything is possible. That's how spring makes me feel.
Oh, wow. Okay. I see. I'm quite the opposite.
Yeah.
I'm completely in love with autumn. Always have been. And my nephew said to me, he's 8, and he was like, what is it about this time of year? Because I was saying it to him the other day. And I just love this time of year. And I said, I couldn't really articulate it though, because, you were saying it before about thinking about why it is your favorite. And the only thing I could come up with, and what I've always said, is there's magic in the air, because it just feels like, I don't know what that says about me, Lou, anyway.
But I love that, because actually this is a perfect example of how different seasons hit people differently, right? Yeah. So for me, spring, it's like anything is possible. But actually the autumnal energy is similar, but it's just moving in an opposite direction. So it's like there's an excitement to what's coming, maybe. Like there's a release, then maybe there's a relief as well, potentially, after the summer heights. So if I just finish the 4 seasons, it's like we move then into summer, and it's like, this is where we take action. This is where we're the most mobile. This is where the most generous, and we're in saying yes to life. And this is where potentially we have the most energy. But also, what we have to watch if we're keeping an eye on the kind of mental health side of things is that we don't burn out, right? So, this is the piece where we also have to manage ourselves. And if we haven't rested well in winter, we
Yeah.
maybe won't have as much energy in summer. And
Yeah.
also, if we go too extreme in summer and overplan, then we won't be able to fulfill everything, and we will, but we'll feel awful. So then autumn comes, and it's like, oh, I can slow down, I can take the pressure off a bit. Maybe I can say no to a few things, and actually, I'm just going to focus on these things that are really a priority. And actually, I've mentioned that transition from summer to autumn for some people can feel like a big grief. They can resist it. Some people,
Really?
it's like a welcoming balm, you
Ah,
know? So,
yeah.
so it's really interesting to notice how you respond throughout the year to
Yeah.
these different seasons and to those transitions as well.
It is so fascinating. I was thinking as you were talking, going back to like the Christmas, New Year, and winter,
Yeah.
and the tree sucking up the nutrients. And I was thinking about how many people in January are feeling very guilty of all the indulgement they might have done in
Yeah.
December. So they're literally like on the fad diets, starving themselves and
Right.
doing the complete opposite of what the natural cycle is,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is to nourish and to get as
Yeah.
many nutrients as you can. Um,
Yeah. And if we look at the earth, and I'm not a specialist in this by any means, but I've just done a couple of workshops with some friends who are very knowledgeable about this. It's like if you look at the earth, it's bare. So actually, if we were living with the land, we wouldn't have the ability to be able to indulge ourselves at that time.
mm,
So that's really interesting that then there's this kind of kickback from when we do that in January. And I'm working this year with like living closer to the earth, which is really like interesting then to see how that what that will look like at Christmas and those natural things that of course I want to be involved with, but actually how if I don't overindulge, then what will the impact be on my mental health in January? Because
ooh,
I won't have that ping back and it
yeah.
won't be as extreme. And actually, can I allow rest in? Can I allow the slowness in? Can I embrace it as opposed to resist it, knowing that in spring, come February, natural energy will rise again and that will nourish me for the rest of the year.
I'm so invested in this, Lou. It sounds awesome. I'm going to bring up like modern lifestyles. I mean,
Yeah.
social media, technology, AI now is just booming, isn't it? Like, this is
Yeah.
all disconnecting us from natural cycles. And what do you think, like, some of the mental
Mm-hmm.
health consequences of this will be? Because it just seems to be only going one way, and that's more technology, more technology, more technology. What was that quote that the founder of Netflix said, that their biggest competition was sleep? Because they just wanted people to be watching
Mm.
all the time, you know? Yeah, I'd love to know your thoughts on this because I think you're going to say something which will act as a good reminder to us all because it's so easy to get pulled into, well, yeah, just
Mm.
modern life.
And, I tussle with this every day too. I'll start there. Cyclical living in a modern day society is tricky to do. There's no two ways about it. And I think that's why we need each other. That's why community and women's circles or sharing circles or, having groups that you can come to, which will tether you into it, or having regular practices like menstrual cycle awareness practices and yoga practices or meditation practices will tether you into yourself as opposed to something outside of you.
With some of the clients that you work with,
Mm-hmm.
before they get put on the path of cyclical living, like what are some of the more common mental health problems that you find they're struggling with that can be, I'm not going to say eliminated, but certainly relieved by embracing this cyclical living way of life?
Yeah. So I think a big one for me, especially working in the field that I do with the community that I do, which is obviously menstruating women. So that is who I'm talking to about here in this example, often is people pleasing and boundaries. So that's a really big one that has a knock-on effect to their mental health and their anxiety, their stress levels, their feeling of not being good enough, their being too much. There's all of these narratives that are frequently spoken to me, and that, to be honest with you, I feel myself, like it is a narrative that we are brought up with within our cultures and communities. And I think the really cool thing about working with your cycle is that it helps you unravel all of that. So saying no, being able to be really clear with your boundaries, being able to say, like, this is when it would suit me to do this thing. And of course, life comes up. Of course, life does. And of course, I've got a 6-year-old son. I'm a solo mum. If he's sick and I'm bleeding like it was this month, I have to take care of my child. Like, there's just no-brainer there. But I also know that I will then maybe give myself a few days to restore afterwards, or I will adapt our weekend to be like, do you know what? No, we're not going to do that thing because we both need to rest more. Or, yeah, it's that flexibility and awareness of being like, you're a whole person, I'm a whole person. And actually, in modern life, when it comes to working, when it comes to parenting, whether that's as well, I'm 40, so I'm looking at my parents who are older and getting older. And then I've got young children as well. And I think a lot of people are caught in that cross as well, where they're caring in both directions.
Yeah.
That's a really big thing.
Yeah.
That can have an impact.
Circle of life, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's the level of responsibility.
You don't get a bigger cycle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's also the phase of life that you're in is a really big piece of what I do in recognizing, because we have these physical rites of passage. And Jane Hardwick Collins talks about this. I studied with her earlier this year. And we've missed a lot of these really significant physical rites of passage. Our menarche, so our first bleed, honoring birth and pregnancy the way that it's supposed to be. And then we've obviously got everything in the media now about perimenopause and menopause happening.
Yeah.
But honestly, coming back to your question, the biggest thing for me is that women start to advocate for themselves. No, my needs matter.
Yeah.
No, my practice matters. Actually, no, I need you to leave me alone for 5 minutes in the morning so I can do my breath work. Like those boundaries, those no's, those I deserve this. That is the biggest, most empowering thing. I can feel my whole body's lit up just by saying it. But it is, and it sounds simple, but actually when you do it on a daily basis and you reorganize your life around those small things, like I get it, we're busy. We can't be, 2 hours of practice a day necessarily.
Yeah.
But we can fit these things in with our modern lives. Take that walk at lunchtime, but actually do it mindfully. Like, can you notice the different colors of the trees? Can you notice the way that your body's feeling in your clothes? Come back inside yourself so that you're not constantly being dictated to about how you feel through a screen. And I think, that I hadn't heard that Netflix quote. On one hand, I understand where they're coming from. On the other hand, I think it's a really scary thing that we have this stuff. Again, using social media, those kinds of things, very boundaried with it. And being able to kind of have those structures and strategies that you lean into so that you don't fall off. And then the biggest thing is compassion. Compassion when we're imperfect humans and we're naturally going to maybe, scroll at bedtime or whatever, but we don't need to beat ourselves up again and add to the fuel to the fire. Yeah. And I think, again, working with your cycle and seeing how different you might be in different seasons of your cycle, different seasons of your year, actually allows you to accept all sides of yourself. And often that is what we're resisting. We're trying to be, let's face it, our summer selves, because that's what society wants us to be. They want us to be productive and active and social and articulate and outwardly looking, facing, externalized, when actually we can't sustain that. That's not healthy. And that's the thing that affects us, because we don't allow the autumn winter side of our cycles to come in and really nourish us. We don't have the ability to say, do you know what? I can't work today because I'm not at my best. We don't have work cultures that allow for.
Oh, that would be amazing if we could do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've worked for companies that are like that. And when I was a virtual assistant for a little while, and I literally had in my contract, I was like, I don't work on day 1 and 2 of my cycle.
Wow. And they allowed that?
Well, the clients that I worked with me about based on that.
Oh, okay. Because you were your own.
Because I was freelance. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
when Red School, I know, for instance, their organization is set up exactly like that. Like when they are bleeding, they are not working. And everybody else just comes in and picks up. And you talk about like where you are, whether that is seasonally or whether that is like how you're feeling that day,
Yeah.
right? It's just
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
way of answering, how are you? Oh, I'm day 11. I'm feeling pretty good. Oh, I'm day 28. I'm really ready to bleed. Instantly, that narrative allows people to be like, oh, okay, cool. I know where you're at. I can
Yeah.
then relate to you in a different way
In the
based on that information.
in the order of balance, can you have that kind of a conversation with a male who doesn't know what it's like to bleed and the roller coaster of emotions when you are amidst, that time of the month, shall we say, in terms of getting men to be part of this world too, when they and the understanding how it can affect them as well, I suppose, in that
Yeah.
respect, but especially the women in their life who do bleed.
So I think there's two things here. One is they have a cycle too. They have a hormonal cycle, but a male hormonal cycle is 24 hours, whereas a female hormone cycle is however long their cycle is, be that,
Right.
24 to 35 days,
Wow.
however long it is. So the atypical cycle they talk about is 28, 29 days.
Yeah.
And that's because of the moon, like the moon cycle is that. So first off for them is to notice, well, how do you feel in the morning versus lunchtime, during afternoon, and then in the evening?
Mm.
So if we asked you to go and do a really important speech at 11 o'clock at night, how's that going to feel to you? If you had to do a presentation in front of your CEO at 11 o'clock at night when you were really tired and you'd already done a full day at work and you were exhausted,
Mm.
how would that feel for you? And it's that context of being like, oh, okay, we're asking. It's
Uh-huh.
not to say that we can't do it because you probably could muster it as a one off, right?
Yeah.
But actually, you might need a sleep in the next day because you'd been stimulated.
Uh,
It wouldn't feel quite right to you. It's like, well, actually, it would be better for me. It would be better for me to do it then. But actually, if, say it was in Australia or something and it was the only time people could do, of course you could do it, which is what we're saying with women with the menstrual cycle. Of course we can do anything at any time, but when is it optimal? Because that supports our mental health. And
mm,
that's ultimately what we're saying here. We don't ask people to work late in the evening because we know that that has a knock-on effect to their well-being.
yeah.
Uh,
But we
and
do expect women who are on their period, whether they suffer or not, to suck it up, basically.
yeah, and I think it's the invisible load again that women are carrying through the menstrual cycle that
Mm.
we're not seeing, that's not talked about because we have sucked it up. We
Yeah.
do it. And in
Yeah.
some ways, the conversations that I find the trickiest are, I've spoken to a lot of workplaces about menstruality in the workplace.
Yeah.
And it is the female leaders who are saying to me, but I can't admit that because comparatively,
Mm.
I feel like I am less than my male counterparts. But because we're not embracing the cyclical gifts, so when a woman then is in her spring or her summer, to be able to then really enhance her skills and be able to take everything that she dreamed of and that she visioned and she came up with, because that's what it used to be. We used to walk off into our red tents and we used to bleed. We'd come out and the men folk and the children would be like, what did you see, what did you vision? It literally was a vision quest.
I'm just thinking about like how many women have probably been on their period and a meeting's run over and they're probably bleeding through their pants because
Right.
they can't go and sort themselves out because the person is still talking and we're too
Yes.
ashamed to say anything. So we're just thinking, oh God, I hope I'm not leaving blood on the seat or anything. Sorry to get too graphic, but
No,
like
no.
flip that to you had a wound on your leg and it was gushing with blood. It would be a completely different story, wouldn't it?
100%. And I think this is the stuff. I don't know if you recently saw there was a BBC article saying something about girls having to prove their period pain when they're in school.
Oh my
And
God.
I was just like, how do you prove pain? How
Yeah.
do you prove pain? And I think this is the bit that, again, it's all invisible. I know women who have come back after childbirth, their flow is very heavy, they're very anxious, they want to sit by the door, but they're in maybe a corporate space that it just adds to the mental load of, right, I've got to get to the meeting early because I want to get the seat by the door. And this is all the stuff that we go through that's invisible.
Mm.
And I think it's fab that we're talking about it, and it doesn't negate men. And I think men can be real allies to just know it's just like, oh, I'm on my period. Do you mind if I sit closer to the door? And you don't even need to say anything. You just say, do you mind if I need to sit close to the door?
Yeah, exactly. Rather than it being used by men as a weapon, because there's that, oh, she must be on a period, like if somebody's a bit grumpy or whatever.
Yeah.
I think that is changing. I think we are hopefully getting rid of that kind of toxic masculinity perspective, but it might take a few more generations, unfortunately, I think.
Well, and also to change the narrative around that of like, yeah, you know what? I am grumpy, but I'm grumpy because of X, Y, and Z. So this is the natural state of being in our summer and being in our performative, our external. I look great. I can spin all the plates. I'm superwoman. I can do everything.
Yeah.
And then our hormones shift and we go into this phase of discernment, which is our autumn, which is one which is like, if you want to look at it, it's the time in life where women are on the other side of menopause. So we're not accepting any BS anymore. Like my analogy is like you go from being okay with the pants beside the laundry basket to then actually saying something about the fact that, do you know what? You can put the pants in the laundry basket, versus then further into your inner autumn being like, put your effing pants in the laundry basket, which is sometimes how it can come out. But it is that thing of actually you have crossed a boundary. I'm perfectly capable of doing that. Of course I am. But actually, should I be? And this is where it comes back to me about, for me, with working with the cycle that's so distinctive. And the power within the autumn is we can get really clear and really focused on what is true. We can speak really articulately, and we can also discern what's right and wrong really well.
Yeah.
And so it's a brilliant time to do things like editing, capturing like improvements. So your critic is out in your inner autumn, but using your critic for good and not evil, being like, how can I make this better? What do we need to do? Like having those conversations. I always have like family chats at that time. Like, guys, what do we think about mornings? Are we doing it well? I don't feel like it's going as well as we could be,
Yeah.
Like, how can we do this better? Because actually, my body is telling me, my emotions, that something's off and I'm getting irritated. Now, it's my responsibility to not howl and swear and whatever. And as Red School call it, hold the tension. But actually, when I start paying attention to those signals of being like, oh, I feel irritated. Why am I irritated here? There's something not right. And the thing is when we start listening to that and following through on that, we learn to trust ourselves. That's what builds the empowerment piece of the cyclical lifestyle and living and menstrual cycle awareness. It heals so much in us when we can trust ourselves to be like, no, my body's telling me something's off and I'm going to say something about it.
Yeah. Fascinating stuff. Honestly, I feel like I could record another 4 podcasts. I've not.
We can if you want to, Gabby. I'm up for that.
I've got that down, people. We've got witnesses now. Because I barely looked at my questions, so there's plenty more I could ask you. But I can't let you go before we conclude with the Happier Life Project's last 5 in 5. It's the same 5 questions that I ask every guest to conclude the episode. Yeah. Are you ready, Lou?
Yeah, hit me.
Okay. When and where are you at your happiest?
Walking in the woods, holding hands with my son.
Oh, love that. What's your favorite thing to do that nourishes your mental health?
Oh, easy. Sauna and sea dips. There's an amazing sauna down at Sandbanks in near Poole, and you go in the sauna and it's white sands as you look out, and then you run in the sea. And then you go back in the sauna, you run in the sea, and it's just the most awesome thing to do.
Wow.
Yeah.
What piece of advice do you now know that you wished somebody would have told you earlier that would have made you a happier person?
I just want to say, like, trust yourself. Like what your body is telling you is true. Yeah. What your body is telling you is true.
What is the most important one thing that needs to change to make the world a happier place?
Compassion.
And finally, what is a simple, actionable first step we can take when it comes to embracing a more cyclical way of life that will help us on our journey to building a happier life?
Yeah. Start tracking your cycles. Yeah. Start tracking your cycles. And I have a free guide, which I'm really happy to share with everybody if they would like it too. So,
well, you've nicely segued me into, I was going to say, for more on you, let's point away. So people can find you on Instagram. Is it cool for me to share that?
Yeah, we'd love you to.
So it's Instagram.com, Lou, Lou, Perham, Perham. You've also got a website, haven't you, where people can sign up to stuff?
Yeah, there's a few freebies that I've got. So tracking your cycle. I also have a holistic guide to a better cycle. So that is about managing your cycle well, and then all prevention as well. So like if you're experiencing pain, it's basically everything I wish I'd known at 25 and didn't. I've put it all down in a free e-guide for people so that they can have pointers, resources, counselors. Like there's everything there that people might need. That's in the link in my bio and
in the link in your bio
from Instagram. Yeah, everything's just in my bio on Instagram. And then if people want to come and see me in person and want to do some cyclical work, I do work online, but you can also come and see me in person because I do body work and womb healing and that kind of stuff. So yeah, I'm down in Winchester in the UK, so people can reach out.
And you've got a retreat coming up, haven't you, in November?
I do, yeah. Radical Rest. So I've been running Radical Rest for about 5 years, and she is just stunning as a body of work. She's helped people reconnect to themselves, find stillness and peace through grief, loss, healing, connection with friends. Like I've had groups of girlfriends just book together and stuff and come down, but it's in the heart of the New Forest and it's a really stunning venue. And it's a morning as well, which I really like doing because it's not then all day. So it's 9 till 12:30. Yep. It's just a really stunning opportunity to really rest and really restore. And it's that real winter energy that we need to bring, especially in November. So I'd love folks to come along if they're interested.
Absolutely. And again, if people want to find out more about your retreat and working with you in person, either online or in actual person, then Instagram again, Instagram.com, Lou Perham. And I'll put that in the episode show notes as well. Lou, this has been absolutely fascinating. I mean, selfishly, I'm like, God, I've learned loads. So I hope everybody else has too. I'm sure they have. Thank you for teaching us all about cyclical living.
Yeah, I love it so much. And if anybody has any questions, I'm ever so friendly. So please just reach out.
Real. Gabby back with you. Thank you again to the wonderful Lou Perham. And thank you to you for listening to this episode of the Happier Life Project. Please allow me just one more minute of your time to run through the important housekeeping. If you are suffering with your mental health, there is a crisis button on the My Possible Self app, which will signpost you to the correct information for immediate expert advice. Those of you who are listening on one of the podcast platforms, the My Possible Self app is completely free to download, so you don't need to worry about it costing you anything. If you are in crisis or you think you may have an emergency, please do call your doctor or the emergency services immediately. The views expressed in this podcast are solely those of the interviewer, which is me, and the interviewees. The content of this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be considered as a substitute for professional or medical advice. Our partners at the Priory Healthcare are not involved in the production or content of this podcast. If you are listening on one of the podcast platforms, you know what I'm going to say. Please do subscribe and leave a review, especially if you found this episode helpful. And to find and follow us on social media, we are most active on Instagram, and you can find us at My Possible Self, and I've been at Radio Gabby. Do take care, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.